Chapter 7. A Civil Tryst. Boxing Day, 26th of December, 1643 AD. Henley-on-Thames, the Kingdom of England. Andy wasn't sure how he got here, but decided to embrace the whole HistorAI simulation and go along with it, as he enjoyed history. As a photographer, he always appreciated being able to analyze a situation from another vantage point, often not being directly involved, but taking a more aloof or distant stance. In this case, he acknowledged that he was briefly trapped in a 17th century tavern somewhere near Henley. He wasn't entirely sure whether it was a dream, or perhaps partial dream instigated by the AI software, but it seemed benign. He was in the upstairs room of what appeared to be a tavern. It was a small room, with a simple bed with white sheets, an open window with some brown-coloured shutters. A small fire was gently roaring in the corner, along with a small writing desk in the corner, which had a pile of papers on it. The floor had some rushes on it, and he could smell a strong scent of manure and straw. He was definitely in the countryside, possibly in Wallingford or Rotherfield Grays. It was hard to tell, but it didn't matter too much as he loved early modern England. He just hoped he wasn't in the English Civil War. That would be a bit stressful for him, seeing as he knew how violent and bloody it was in that time. He heard a song coming from downstairs. It wasn't ruckus, but loud enough that it woke him up. It was some morning chant, clearly fueled by breakfast small ale or wine. He didn't know, but he did quite like the lyrics. "Come, lads, lift your cups, sing cheerily. The king may frown, but we are free. Step lively, boys, with hearts so light, we'll laugh and sing through day and night." It had a nice tune, too. Similar to the old Grand Duke of York, but slightly different. Though he wasn't sure what they meant, the word king meant that perhaps his fears were well-founded, and he had been placed in the English Civil War by the HistorAI. It did clear up the question in his mind, which he had. They had clearly been drinking all night, perhaps due to some victory or valiant battle. He didn't know, but liked that they sounded merry. He wondered whether he ought to join them, or perhaps survey them and watch from a distance. After all, he didn't quite understand how HistorAI worked. It was safer to watch them from afar, in case they had swords, or in case he got caught up in some fight about royalists versus parliamentarians, the ones who didn't want to live under a tyrannical king. The song had roused him, and he felt prideful. He felt as if he could rush into battle himself, even if he didn't know what he was fighting for. The Britain he knew had both republican elements and also the trappings of royalty. Modern Britain had a parliament, freedom, and had enshrined the right of all to vote and live without fear of a tyrannical king. The modern royal family was deeply enshrined in British life, this was true, and he hated the idea of a republic. This meant he was caught between two worlds. The political landscape of Britain had moved on from petty wars and destructive fights over who could be king, and how. Modern society sought different aims. He didn't want to get involved in politics, especially 17th century politics. Then, he looked out the small window and spotted a young guy laying in some hay near the stables. He had long hair, a beautifully put-together outfit, and looked as if he were injured. This forlorn-looking fellow contrasted greatly with the merry band of soldiers he could hear through the floorboards. How old is this inn? It must be ancient, Andy thought to himself as he looked around the room. He wondered whether the young injured soldier was staying here too. He also wondered whether he ought to be outside the tavern, and why he was alone. He'd made his way silently downstairs, and fortunately no one had noticed him. The last thing he wanted was to have to fend off some boisterous soldier who would ask questions about his modern garb, accent, and vernacular. As he approached the young injured soldier, he noticed he had a gash along the side of his body. "Poor guy," he muttered lightly under his breath. Fortunately, the soldier was alive. He had a pallid face and didn't look as if he could hold a conversation. His white shirt and overcoat were both soaked in blood and some other material. He didn't question it and simply placed his arm under the guy's shoulder and hoisted him up so they were both standing. He helped Andy silently and didn't resist. He seemed to have a slight urgency to his actions along with being out of breath. Andy wondered whether he was recently injured or maybe if he was on the run. Perhaps he wanted to avoid the band of singing soldiers inside the tavern. He found a letter inside. It was a hastily written note. To my son Brian, heed well these my words. I am bounden on to the field of war. See thou carest for thy mother. The town hath turned against the king, and thou must make haste to convey her into safety, for she standeth sore in need of thee. Arm thyself and repair forthwith unto the King's Arms upon Aldershot Road in Henley upon Thames. God be thy guide and shield, and grant thee strength in all thy deeds. Oswaldus de Clare. The letter had been hastily written, with what looked like iron gall, an ancient ink which he had used in art class. He felt a sudden pang of sadness for the soldier. He was on the run. He had been heading to Henley, obviously to escape the onslaught of parliamentarian soldiers from the New Model Army or other militia groups. English people setting upon their fellow countrymen. It filled him with sadness. He dragged the guy up to his room and set him upon the bed, struggling with the amount of fabric his costume consisted of and the amount of adornments and various different belts attached to his person, including his light armour. He must have had at least 6 layers on him. It was ridiculous. He wished he had his camera on him for the HistorAI simulation, as he could have taken some fantastic photographs. He was handsome and somewhat dishevelled. He took a pan of water from the side and gently washed his face with a slightly dirty rag. It didn't matter what he used, the main thing was that this guy had clearly seen better days. His eyes were still shut and he was breathing quietly. He looked handsome. Almost sexy. That thought quickly escaped Andy's mind as he took off his heavy leather boots. His feet were bloody huge, rough on the bottom. He had clearly been on the run for a day or two at least. As he studied his feet, he heard a voice. By God, who art thou, that tendest me so? I know not thy name, or how thou camest to be here. Thou hast saved me, and yet I scarce know whether to thank thee or marvel at thee. Speak, friend, what manner of person art thou? It was a soft English accent, almost West Country to his ears, with a rhoticism which belied the 300-year gap between the two of them. He responded as best he could. Andrew. My name is Andrew. I rescued you. You were outside. Andrew? Thou sayest thy name is Andrew? By my troth, I scarce ken what manner of man thou art, yet thou hast lifted me from death this morn, he responded, pushing his body up against the back of the bed, using his elbows to hold himself up. Andy was struck at how handsome he looked, especially now that his shirt had been removed and he only had some trousers or breeches on. He couldn't tell what they were exactly, but still appreciated the muscled, taut body that was presented to him. He had nice pecs, too, but they were sullied by the gash on the side of his body, which had been hastily bandaged at some point. You were outside. I was worried you'd be in danger, or something. He smiled as he responded, clearly not bothered by Andy's accent or the vocabulary that he used in comparison to his own. By heaven, thou art fair indeed. I scarce thought any soul would come for me, and here thou art, with eyes bright and hands gentle. I was lost to the chill and peril, and yet thou hast saved me. I knew not such grace might walk abroad this morn. Andy appreciated the slightly wordy compliment and smiled. His eyes rested on the soldier's lips. He looked back up at his eyes. He was actually turned on. How was this possible? He could see that the soldier had gone slightly hard as they'd spoken. He wasn't sure whether to be turned on himself or find it weird that a 17th century soldier had decided to be aroused by his presence. Do you need help with anything else? Andy asked, slowly tracing the guy's body from his eyes all the way down to his pecs, to his abs, and then finally resting on his groin. It was subtle, but conveyed his desire at that second. Kind sir, Thy gaze doth set my blood afire. If thou meanest to ease my pain, then come hither, and I shall not resist thy ministrations, he responded. Andy got the hint. He knew this guy wanted him. He wondered how far he could push it. He had already been sitting at the end of the bed as he had removed the soldier's shoes and shirt earlier. He reached over and started touching the guy's package. It was hard, huge, and he clearly had meant for Andy to reach over and start playing with his cock. He felt lustful. He couldn't stop himself. He kept pushing the simulation further to see how far it could go. The guy was called Brian, and looked remarkably similar to his friend Brian, Archie's boyfriend, who was staying at Silverbourne Manor that week for Christmas. It was uncanny, but he pushed it from his mind. Ah, good God, thy touch doth drive me to folly. I am thine, wholly, if thou wilt have me so. You like that, eh? He said as he continued to caress his package, noting how his cock was now peering through. His balls were also slowly coming out from under the material. Then a bang at the door stopped him. His heart skipped a beat as he heard banging. Hold, villains! Thou shalt answer for thy treachery against the state, a loud booming voice called. He heard the sound of metal being drawn from the sheath and knew that they had come to draw their swords, ready to fight. Come forth, traitors! The Parliament commands thee. Resist not, lest thee be struck down. He looked at Brian, the injured soldier, aghast in the face. Neither of them knew what to do. The soldier had lost his erection entirely and had gone flaccid, then had struggled to pull his clothes over his body as he got dressed. Andy didn't know how to help or what to do. Fortunately, the soldier responded. Hold, good sirs, we mean no treachery. Prithee, let not your swords find us thus. No word shall save thee if deceit lurks. Open, or be struck where ye stand, the soldiers outside called, clearly wanting them to open the door. Andy was scared and didn't know whether the HistorAI would continue the simulation. If it was a dream, then he wanted it to end. He couldn't die, could he? He wasn't sure. He closed his eyes and tried to escape, which was the only thing he could think of doing. A civil war would be bloody, and he would surely die. No, he didn't want this. This wasn't the history he wanted to immerse himself in. He closed his eyes even more tightly. Then silence. He was alone. Freddy was asleep beside him, gently snoring and muttering something in what sounded like Latin or Norman French. Something about Sicily and a night called Declare. He wasn't sure what had happened to him, and instead of rousing Freddy, he decided to sleep. He noticed that Freddy was touching his dick slightly. Perhaps he was having a similar simulation. He touched it, and it was rock hard. He'd attend to that later, he thought to himself. For now, he wanted to sleep and get rest. Perhaps he would tell Freddy about this when they both woke up, or perhaps not, as the guy had been called Brian. He wasn't sure. He went back to sleep and rested peacefully, knowing civil war would never touch him.